Recording in progress. So welcome back. Second part of lecture. We're going to do some demos. Let's start with what we're doing here in the assignment. All right. So we are talking about materials. We're talking about, for this portion of the materials assignment, reflectivity. How reflective is an object? How rough is it? What color is it? So your objective is to find references for all the objects in your scene that are visible to the camera in the close-up and in the long shot, and to any objects that might be visible in reflections, which means they could be objects off camera. All right, so as I mentioned, start by duplicating your Project 5 folder, rename it to Project 6. Do that for the Zen Garden, do that for the interior. This way you've got two separate working versions. We recommend that you guys review the SAL Look Development Guide for materials and textures. It's on our OneDrive. You can also download it as a PDF. For this assignment, you will download new versions of the templates that we have, which are basically all the way down here. So we've got a thermos reference, which is basically that thermal container that's on the desk for the interior. Also got the bread reference. This is what we use to model that bread. So you can kind of see where we got it from. That way there is no guess for it. New template files. So I'm going to go over this in a second because this does merit a little bit of discussion. And also the Lecture 6 demo files, which is basically a very simple Maya project folder structure that we supply a dome light image for and a very simple scene file. All right, so back to the look development doc real quick. As I mentioned, you're going to be required to find reference for all your objects in your scene that are visible to the camera and or visible in the reflections too. Now, you're going to find shots or reference images that contain more than one object that you like. It's very rare that you will find every single object in the scene useful for the reference that you find. You know, you may like the carpet or not carpet. You may like the walls. You may like the sofa. You may hate the windows. You may hate some of the other stuff, pillows, whatever, right? Find reference for what you like. It's going to be collaged in the templates. And you can overlap them. Just we need to be able to see and have very clear which image you are using for what objects. Label them, please. All right. Yeah, let's go down here. We'll do this. So you do have quite a bit of artistic freedom with this because you will be the one looking for the types of objects you want in your scene. Remember, you've got an exterior scene, which is the Zen garden. If you did it at night, you've got candles. If you did it during the day, no candles. It's the only difference. The interior, same scene, same objects. You're only going to do the two scenes that you lit. One interior, one exterior. One of them's going to be day, one of them's going to be night. So as I mentioned, you're responsible for adding materials and color to all the elements that are visible in the render, including what is visible in the reflections. We are not applying reference images as textures. We're not using any maps whatsoever. Okay, so we've got a reflectivity milestone, which basically means you will just start finding today all the images that deal with reflectivity. Don't worry about anything that's glass or has liquid in it, like the wine glass, it's got wine in it, or the wine bottle. In the interior, there's quite a few glass pieces, which we've got labeled here. We will get to those on Monday. Now, when you get to do the exterior scene, whether you're doing day or night, there is a label on the wine bottle that you can take and put on a separate display layer. We don't need the label visible for this portion of the assignment. It's only going to be a big cylinder wrapped around the bottle, and we're not going to be able to really see glass. So the object is, we will save that in case you decide you want to use it for texturing. Then it will become a wine label. And we will actually be removing the unwanted portions of geometry at render time using what's called an opacity map, and be able to make it look like that label is glued onto the bottle. All right, so you're going to notice a couple of things. Some of the demos we've got here, or not demos, but versions that students have done, we always like to show as kind of samples of what can be done. For the Zen garden, feel free to use our photo reference that we gave you with Project 5 if you want to recreate the Zen garden. And if you're going to do that, I highly recommend go to Building 4D in the back and take a look at the actual Zen garden itself. Take your own pictures too. If you choose to do something else, you're going to need reference for all the elements that are in that scene, like the trellis and the table and the stools and the sofa and the concrete slab that everything is sitting on. So you don't have to use the Zen garden images we gave. You don't have to make it look like Full Sail Zen garden, but you do need reference images that will work with the geometry you have. And believe it or not, there are plenty of trellises on the internet that kind of conform to what we have here with different materials. So if anybody's been back to the Zen garden, those beams that hold up that trellis are steel. They are construction steel I-beams. And there's like a little wooden inset in here. The top, that's kind of, I think the braces are steel. The top part, I think, is aluminum. Not really sure. Table, steel legs. They're actually bolted onto the concrete so they don't blow away. Oh, you lost audio. Yep, I didn't mute it as far as I know, Amber. All right, so you need to find reference for all these objects if you choose to not do the Zen garden. Now, the close-up shot, you will notice that the reference and the render is black and white. I have a layer in Photoshop in these templates that will automatically convert your color reference to black and white. It's called an adjustment layer. And all you have to do is drop it inside the folder and it will automatically convert it to black and white. Same thing for the render. So don't worry about trying to render out black and white. You don't. You render out color, you drop it into the Photoshop layer, black and white. The reason we want the close-up black and white is we don't want to be distracted by color. We want to see how well you did getting the material properties. How reflective is it? How rough is it? Did you get the basic value of the color? Same thing goes for glass. Interior also. Does that make sense? Questions? Questions so far? All right, Jonathan's good. Amber's good. Katie, okay. So back to the look development guide. So we give you kind of a couple examples of what an exterior might look like, what an interior might look like, how you want to label your images. Like I said, you may find the perfect reference image that contains the entire environment and you're in love with it. Great. Hardly ever happens. Like I said, all the elements you don't have in your main image, find individual images that show the material properties, show how it works in an environment, and all of the necessary color roughness information. All right, so opaque objects, which is what we are working on today. Basically, doesn't matter what order, but for us, honestly, I find it to be simpler if you go into how reflective is it? How rough is it? And then color. And then this one, this kind of goes with number one. It's like 1A here. Does the reflectivity change based on your viewing angle? Now, when we get into transparent objects, we're going to be dealing with things like what kind of transparency is it? Is it water? Is it glass? Is it plastic? How much does the light bend as it passes through? Level of roughness, which on most hard, clear surfaces, and clear, I'll go and stretch it to even colored glass, because you can see through it. They're fairly smooth. You will see some roughness in some of them, but they're pretty smooth. They're not going to be perfectly 0 degree smooth, but they're smooth. And then when we get into glass, is it clear versus is it a color? Metal objects, is it anisotropic? And metal sort of goes hand in hand with the usual opaque objects, except a couple little different things where you have to worry about the color of the metal. Is it white metal? Is it red metal? Okay, so we need reference images for all the objects. Like I said, if you've got an image with multiple objects, just label the ones you are using. I like the floor. I like the walls. I like the sofa. Hate the pillows. So you have another reference for pillows. You have another reference for the computer desk. You have another reference for all the stuff above the TV, for the entertainment center, for the chairs, for the lamps. Avoid things with white backgrounds. Like I said, these are magical, mystical, floating matrix backgrounds. They don't have any footing in the real world because you can't tell how they react in an environment. You need an actual environment. When you start getting around to look for look development for the cheese, avoid cartoony cheese with holes in it. No matter what you do to that wedge of cheese in the Zen garden, you're never going to make it look like it actually has holes because it's not modeled. If you wanted holes, you'd have to model the holes in there, especially if they are big holes, in order for it to look accurate. Because this implies light direction. We've got shadow, we've got light areas. That may not match where your light's coming from. Also, you want to avoid any kind of, well, it's got a white background. It looks like it's CG. Avoid it like the plague. Avoid very small thumbnails. Rule of thumb, reference should be at least a 1K image. Oops, I can't write. Come on. At least, there we go. A 1K, which is 1024 image. 2K works the best, but at least 1K. That way, when you look at it full size, you can see it. All right, stuff like this. Oh, there's my reference for my cheese. Well, no, that's not reference for your cheese. That looks more like a cheese texture. We don't want that. Something like this, pretty good. We could deal with that. This, nope. That, yes. That, yes. That, yes. That, yes. We don't have anything cloth. If you're thinking about having like a pleather or leather sofa or some kind of specialized material, make sure you get plenty of reference for it. Today in lab, Frank's going to give you a look development presentation. Frank goes into a lot of detail, and it's really good as far as knowing what to look for, how to deal with it when you find it, what you're going to see, what you want to see out of it, how to use it. So bottles, we're not going to worry about getting reference today yet for wine, glass, clear glass objects. Bottles, nothing. Deal today with everything but this. For the cutting board on the table has to be wood. We're not going to deal with this kind of plastic, acrylic looking cutting board because it has what's called translucency, almost subsurface scattering, where you can see the light kind of go through it and it scatters. We're not going to deal with that. We want to just go with very simple wooden cutting board, because eventually that cutting board you may want to take into substance and dirty it up. You don't want to do that with translucent or semi-transparent subsurface scattering objects because you need way too many maps, and we're not dealing with subsurface scattering skin. That could be a whole career or a whole class in itself. We got enough going on with all the different materials. All right, does that make sense? So use this guide, take a look at it. If anybody has any suggestions, please let us know. We're just trying to make this as useful as possible. Oh, good, we're done. All right. All right, so the templates, let me open one of these in Photoshop just so you can kind of see what's going on. All right. So you'll see left side says drop color reference here, drop your color long shot here at the bottom. On the right side, drop your black and white reference here. This is for the close-up shot. So what you want to do is find images that are pretty decent resolution, pretty decent size for the close-up shot, because that's really what we're going to focus on as far as material properties. Yes, we'll look at all the other stuff and we'll be able to see it, but this is where you want to really show that you know what you're doing. And consequently, you're only going to have a few objects here. You want those objects up here. You don't have to duplicate all the objects in the close-up in the long shot. Save the long shot reference area for all the other objects in your long shot. Very similar to this. Right, we got a table, we got a trellis, we got all that other stuff over here. We're just interested in basically the table setting. Here, we're interested on the computer desk. Computer desk, computer, there's a glass bottle, there's a mug, there's a lamp. You can see the detail in that stuff. Put that here. The rest of everything else goes over on the left. All right, so in Photoshop, on the right side, there are layers. All right, so this layer here that says put close-up shot black and white reference here, you will also put your render here. Notice above it, there is what's called an adjustment layer that has a little right angle arrow that points down. That means this layer is pinned, or sorry, this adjustment is pinned to that layer, meaning it only affects that layer. So consequently, the stuff that's color does not get affected. All right, so the way it works, let me pull in just a quick piece of color reference. Where are we? Reference. All right, so for example, I have this kind of like this for the computer desk because it's nice wood. It's got a lamp. It's got a computer. I even like kind of the walls, the picture frame, and I can see kind of how reflective that wood is here. And this viewing angle is almost similar to what I have in the close-up shot of the interior. So I'm going to bring this into Photoshop. Let's open it up. I'm going to select all, copy it. And I'm going to select, let's put it into the color. Just going to select that layer group and paste. All right, so you notice that it comes in color. Let me resize this. All right, so I could drop that up here. I put it over here, it's the same. Now, if I want to take this layer and I want to drop it up here, if I drop it in here, notice it turns black and white. So anything in this folder gets turned black and white. Anything out of this folder, if I put it into the color reference area, now it's in color. Does that make sense? All you have to do is just drop your reference and your render in that correct folder group. It'll be black and white for you automatically. Resize them, collage them, make sure they overlap, they make sense. And then all your other color stuff goes on the other side. All right, any questions in Zoom? Does that make sense? All right, Jonathan's good. Katie, Amber, questions? AJ, questions? All right. Let's quit out of Photoshop. Don't save. All right, so launch Maya, set your project to this Lecture 6 demo files, and we'll explore making a few materials in Arnold. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over here to my Keynote, and let's kind of zoom in on this object right here. So we're going to play around and see how close we can get to this pretty smooth, dark plastic. All right, so let me set my project first. Open the scene up. So you notice if you've set your project correctly, there's a dome light with an image in it already. There's a sun, there's a ground plane, there's a helix and a sphere. I like the helix because it can self-reflect itself. It does self-reflection. Self-reflect itself. Oof, that was awkward. Anyway, so what we're going to do is we're going to assign. Now, one thing I should preface is each object, each part of an object in your scenes will have a separate material. You cannot use that first standard material you made and expect it to change. You need a unique one for each object. Consequently, you're going to have 50, 60, 70 different materials. Label them as you go for the love of all that's good. You're never going to remember AI standard surface 1 from AI standard surface 89. You're not going, I guarantee you're not going to remember. I don't care how good of a memory you have. After a while, your eyes are just going to roll in the back of your head. So make it easy. Label them according to what they are. So for example, I'm going to select the ground plane, do Shift T, give it an AI standard surface, and I'm going to call it ground. All right, I'm going to select the sphere and the helix because I want them both to have the same material, just so we can see what that looks like in two different kinds of shapes. So going to do Shift T again on those, AI standard surface. And let's go sphere, helix. Now, by default, they have the standard settings that you get when you first create an Arnold surface. Until now, we've been changing all that. We got rid of specular. We're going to leave it on today. And let's do a quick render. I'm just going to render this to see what it looks like. Make sure my image is there in the light. Make sure the lights are working. All right, so you can see right away that everything is super blown out. Now, part of that is going to be from this Arnold AI standard base color. That value of 0.8 is really pretty close to being what we would consider to be white-ish. So for the ground plane, that's the one I'm more concerned with. Let's just grab that and let's make that 0.18, just like we did for all of the objects inside Project 5. It has the AI standard default roughness level, which is 0.2. It's got some reflective surfaces, or it's got reflectivity, which is specular weight at 1. Watch what happens if I keep IPR running and I turn roughness off. You can see we've got a reflection of the sky from our image. But at roughness level of 0.2, we just see a very basic reflection of the sphere itself, and the sphere is pretty fuzzy looking. Right now, for the helix in the sphere, we're going to see how close we can get to this object right here. So let's take stock of it. How would you rate the reflectivity? Sure. So you don't think it's that reflective? Okay, we have 2, we have 8. All right. No, the level of reflectivity. We're not talking about roughness yet. We're talking about this right here. Yes, what did you think I was talking about? Oh, no. This is what we're going to try and make that look like. So yeah, it's pretty reflective. So honestly, I'm going to leave the specular weight at 1. Now, here's kind of the issue with the AI standard surface color when you get it. For one thing, if you've got a lot of light in your scene, it's blown out. You can't really see any reflectivity here. You can't really see any roughness. All you can see is glaring, super bright light gray. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to try and adjust the color of it so it matches the reference a little better. So color comes from the base color. Remember, the specular color is always white unless you're dealing with red metal. So this is going to make it a lot closer to this. And notice as the value gets darker, it's easier to see the reflectivity. Now, once I get really low here in the base color, I like to open up the color picker and actually just change the value. And remember, nothing is pure black. So I'm just going to turn it down to like 0.014. That's what I grabbed. So now I can see it's a lot more reflective like my object over here. So level of reflectivity, okay for now. Color, okay for now. How about roughness? This is where you can see the reflections to adjust the roughness. So that's 0.2. Well, let's turn it off and see. Nothing has pure smooth, right? Yep, absolutely. But compare the level of detail here with it over here. So this is what we get by default. So yeah, we can start turning it down. You said try 0.15. How does that compare with the detail we have in our reference? All right, so let's try 0.1. Getting closer. 0.025. Well, let's just try. Well, let's cut this in half. Let's try 0.05. We'll try splitting it down. All right, so a lot more detail. Notice this is my sun. This is the reflection of my sun off of the ground plane. Notice this is a lot rougher because roughness is up here. Notice it's not quite as rough up here and spread out. So if I turn this roughness off, notice that gets really small. So 0.05, let's try 0.025. Slightly less rough. Yeah, it looks like 0.025 is pretty close. Not perfectly smooth, but for all intents and purposes, you would say that's a fairly smooth looking surface. Now, as far as how dark it is, well, let's drop this down just a little more. It could make it really dark, but kind of loses some life there. Really don't want to go down much lower than that. Now, you could always say, well, maybe the level of reflectivity is too high. Well, let's try dropping the weight. Notice it does get darker. But really kind of like what we're really doing here is we're really adjusting that edge a lot more than we are the face. But it is adjusting the whole thing. Now, it's really hard to tell because they're two different environments. This, we have a bright sky. Here, I got my computer screen next to it. I've got my light above. You can see the backboard of my desk there. We're just trying to get the approximate level of reflectivity here. So maybe that's a little too high. So let me take a screen of that. Let's drop it down a little and compare the two. So this is full reflectivity. This is knocked back to about 0.88. Do we want to go more? Do we want to go less? Do we want to just put it back to where it was? Okay, let's try going lower. That's roughly 0.8 for all intent and purposes. Yeah, just a little more. Yeah, that works. Just dropped a little bit down. Only because it's so dark. And no matter how low we turn that base color down to, we're never really going to get it to be here unless we start dropping down a little bit of the reflectivity, the level of reflectivity. All right, so that's pretty good. Let me get rid of the other images. So pretty good job matching this. Now let's give this one a shot. So we're going to take the same material. First off, amount of reflectivity. When you start off with something like this that you can clearly see has more roughness, I personally recommend turning up the reflectivity all the way so you can start from default and then work with the roughness and then drop it down if you need to. I almost like to turn it back to the original default. So let me go back to 0.2 for the roughness. Let's take the color, make it a little lighter gray. All right, so lighter gray than it was. Back to kind of default roughness, default level of reflectivity. When you've got a lot of roughness on a surface, personally, I like to have as much reflectivity as possible so I can see the roughness. And then if I think it's too much reflectivity, drop that down separate. All right, so let's start increasing the reflectivity. So look what happens when you start to increase it. Notice you lose all that detail inside. It all just becomes kind of a blurry haze. Once you get past like 0.5, getting into 0.6, you've almost lost reflectivity. It looks like you've lost reflectivity all the way. So 0.7, that looks almost like a diffuse material. All the way up, looks almost like a diffuse material. If I want it to look diffuse, that's pretty much what it's going to look like. But this, notice it's just a little brighter because of that little bit of reflectivity, even though it's 100% roughness in theory. It's still not quite the same. So now what we want to do is figure out how much roughness we want. So here's our base, right around 0.2. Definitely needs to be rougher. Trying to look for keeping that highlight sort of together in the middle, but it really kind of blurs out really quickly. So I got it up to 0.35. Still pretty bright in the center there, a little brighter than it is here. Let's try 0.4. Kind of softens it up even more. I can still see a little bit of that sky, sort of sky and clouds in there, really hazy, sort of similar to me being able to see the Mac and my red light from the charger on the right. So let's go up even higher. Let's try 0.5. So 0.5, I kind of lost some of that brightness inside the highlight, and I kind of lost some of the environment there. So I'm looking to keep a little bit of this and just a little bit more detail inside that highlight. So let's try 4 or 5. Little better. That's still a little bright. I'll go back to my little bit of sky. All right, how about the color? I think the value could go down just a touch. Now, if I start to drop down the level of reflectivity, it's going to start to kind of make the object a little darker also, because it's not quite as reflecting as much light. We're also going to lose a little bit of that highlight. How reflective is it on the edges? It's still pretty reflective right here. And that's really what this specular weight is. Let's try drop that down to like 0.9. Right, less reflectivity, more reflectivity, less roughness, more roughness, value. Where are we at with it? What did you guys come up with? Anybody? High, a little higher? All right, let's try taking that down to 0.4. And then maybe we drop this down a little. The one thing I don't want to lose, though, is that highlight spread that we have here on the reference. All right, we've got a little more detail over here on the sides. Highlights not quite as spread out as it was. A little tighter in the middle. Kind of matches that pretty good. All right, let's see if we can get the level of roughness, reflectivity here. All right, so I'm just going to restore this back to the defaults. All right, so rubber grip on the sides. Well, pretty simple. It's going to be definitely rougher than what we used for the buttons. So the buttons were 0.4. We can certainly make this value a lot darker. Looks like it needs to be rougher still. Now, the one thing you will notice with this rubbery grip is, notice it's not as reflective on the edges. And we've got a lot of reflectivity here. So that tells me we need to lower the specular weight a little bit, because that will darken the edges. It's going to affect the highlight too, but it's going to really help with that edge. Now, it looks like it needs to be a little darker. I don't know if I want to go any higher. Let's try it. So pretty dark for the value, pretty high for the roughness. The weight's a little bit lower also, just to take some of that edge brightness off. All right, does that make sense? It's going to be easier because each different object will have its own material. You won't have to constantly be readjusting the materials you're using. Me, I'm lazy. I just applied one material and tried to get 3 different types out of it. All right. Questions so far? All right, let's try. Let's try metal. So let me go and bring this forward. Where are you? Come back here. All right, so when you, whatever search engine you happen to use, make sure, let's go with, somebody pick a metal. Let's do white metal first, then we'll do a red metal. All right, silver. Silver, so we got silver ingots. Avoid that. That's not too bad. Avoid that. Too close to being just pure white background. Definitely out. Now, for your reference, it's always a good idea under tools, and this goes for Google, go to size and go large. There's nothing worse than finding the perfect reference image. You grab it and it comes out to be a thumbnail you can't use. So you want images that are at least 1K, and large usually gives you at least a 1K image. All right, so silver ingots, not too bad. That one's not bad. This one is, well, it's a little better than 2K. How about this one? Not too bad. We're outside. I doubt we're going to find silver ingots outside. Nobody's going to take them outside. Nobody takes precious metals anywhere. They like sit in a bank vault somewhere. Now, you've kind of got tarnished silver. That's pretty cool. Got spoons, can clearly see how they tarnish there. Stop. Go away. No, you're evil. There we go. All right, so nothing outside. We will just adapt. Let's try that one. Save image. See how we do. Oh, WebP. Nope, that ain't gonna work. What's that? Convert? Yeah. Let's get rid of that. I generally don't trust conversions off the web. I usually like to save it to a new window, and then it'll usually give me a JPEG. So now I should be able to save the image. There we go. All right, plenty big enough for reference. So we found reference. That's usually the first thing you want to do. Find reference. Now let's go to the refractive index database and find what is the reflectance for silver. And come on. There we go. So fortunately, oh, you're supposed to give me this. All right, well, let's go silver. There we go. All right, so reflectance, silver, the color, value actually is going to be 0.987. 90 degree, it's going to be 1, so that's easy to remember. This one, that's what we need. All right, so we figured out what the colors are going to be inside Arnold. Let's go make this silver. So first thing I'm going to do, assign a new material to both of these. AI standard surface. Let's call it silver. All right, so base weight's going to be at 1. Color, let's drop that down to 0.987, which I believe is what it is. Yep, 0.987. Let's turn metalness all the way up. Notice it totally took over and made it super reflective. Let's turn the roughness down a little. All right, now, this ingot is pretty rough. So let's crank up Arnold as far as roughness goes. So here's our default. Let's crank it up even more. Now, it's super, super bright here. Actually, what I want to do is actually sample the color that I have off of this image. And what I want to avoid is areas that are super dark and areas that are super bright. What I'm going to try to do is find a medium in between here to figure out what is the value that that image has. So a couple of ways I can do it. In theory, everything's theoretical with Maya. If you click on the color swatch, click on the eyedropper, you should be able to come over here and sample the color. Let's try something like that. You click on the color swatch, click on the eyedropper, and in theory, it should let you come over outside of Maya. It doesn't always work. I'll be honest with you. If it doesn't work, let me hit escape. If it doesn't work, what you can do is you can double click on the color swatch. That brings up the free floating advanced color picker palette. Now, the great thing about this is down here under color wheel, there are tabs, and here's one for image. You can actually load the reference image in. Silver. And all you have to do is left click and it will start sampling for you. So notice that value is a whole lot darker than what the index showed me. But in the case of my silver, I think it probably would work. Now, the only thing I'm going to do here under the colors, I'm just going to turn these off. And that's really, I wanted the value for that. Now, honestly, when you sample the color, make sure you click done, by the way, because if you don't, that thing will stay open. And every time you click on something, it'll sample the color. It's evil. Just so you understand. Now, honestly, most of the time when you actually color pick the color, because your environment's different, it doesn't quite show up to be the same. So I'm still seeing a little lower value in here than I do here because of the level of light. So I'm just going to come down here and drop it a little until I can start to match my reference over here. Now, the roughness level definitely needs to be a little higher. You can barely make out everything are just vague shapes in this ingot. Now, if your metal is too rough, it doesn't really start to look like metal anymore. Down here, I'm still getting the feel that it's metal, but up here, I don't know, it just looks like a fuzzy ball. Right, so that kind of makes sense. Yeah. Now, I could probably drop the edge color down a little bit too, because I dropped it down quite a bit here. So let's drop it down just a little bit. Notice if I drop it down, it really does help to darken the edges of that object. Just going to drop it down a hair. There we go. Now, what if I want to make this brushed silver? Make it anisotropic. Well, I can come down here under the specular, and I can take anisotropy, and let's crank it up to 0.9. Notice it stretches that highlight horizontally. Now I want to rotate that so it stretches vertically. So that's going to be 0.25. If I crank up my anisotropy, you can see it kind of really focuses that highlight. All right, does that make sense? Questions? About Zoom? Anybody got questions? Make sense? Jonathan's good. Amber, no questions. Katie, questions? AJ, questions? All right, let's do a red metal. Copper, okay. Oops, forgot an extra P. Yeah, mini copper. All right, so here we go, copper. Don't forget, every time you change your search, you're going to have to reset the size. There we go. So got lots of copper here. Let's see if we can find some bowls or pans. Oh, that's hammered. That's very cool, but that's a little above what we want to do. Blender monkey. How to clean and polish your copper pans. I'll bet that's salt, because salt and acid work. Copper, copper, copper. Ooh, here we go. Copper pans. They're pretty smooth, some of them. The backs here, a little bit rougher than that curved top. Why not? Let's see if we can do it. Save as. Oh, good. It's a JPEG with a 600 character name. All right, let's go back to our refractive index database. Copper. All right, so looks like our 0-degree reflectance, 0.755. 90 is 1. That should be easy to remember. But we're always going to do this to start, but then we're going to base it off of how it looks when we render. At least we can get a start for the level of reflectivity. All right, so 0.755. So let's assign a new material. Now, as you make these materials, you can also save them and create your own material library. I'll show you how to do that next lecture. What you can do is you can start making materials. You save out each little material as its own Maya material file. And I'll show you how to do that in the Hypershade on Monday. And what you can do is you can use them. They are super small. They're like 9 kilobytes. And you can bring them into a scene through the Hypershade and just have them all done and just pop them in. So as you start to make this stuff, make a library for yourself of materials that you've made that you like and would like to reuse. All right, so copper, let's give it the value, 0.755. a little bit darker. Let's start rendering. Metalness goes all the way up. How about our level of reflectivity? Let's open up our reference.